something I noticed in all forms of media, whether it's TV, social media, radio, you name it. People don't actually have the ability to debate using facts, evidence, or reason anymore. What I noticed is a lot of people, they like to appeal to authority, which is a logical fallacy. For those of you that are unfamiliar with appeal to authority, this is what it is. If you're debating, and I'm hypothetically saying this, I've never really looked into this issue that much. It's never really interested me. If you're debating legalizing all drugs, you have facts, you have evidence, you have different things in the form of data that you've looked at, you present that. Instead of actually debating counterpoints or showing how your data is misleading or possibly wrong, your opponent in the debate will bring up someone who is a scientist, an academic, someone who is an expert in the field. For example, and this is purely hypothetical, Mr. Michael Johnson, who has a PhD from Harvard in science, says that if you legalize all drugs, it means that you'll have less people in prisons and you'll have less people die from overdoses. Now, again, I'm not looking at this issue. I don't know if it's true or not. I don't use drugs, so it's not really something on a day-to-day basis that I worry about. I'm more worried about the economy and putting food on the table. But you get the point. And if you were to ask that person, how did Mr. Johnson come to that conclusion? If they simply responded, he's from Harvard. You're telling me someone that didn't even graduate from college knows more than someone from Harvard? You see that all the time, which is a form of elitism as well. That means they can't actually explain their data, their studies, how they came to that conclusion. But if you were to say, here's who he sampled, here's his evidence, and actually explained it, that would mean that he used him as a source for the evidence. But if he were to simply say, that's his opinion, that's final. You think you know more than someone from Harvard with a PhD? You dumbass. You see this all the time. Like, I'm sure you see this if you talk about something in science. I'm not here to say what I believe or don't believe, but if you have a different opinion about climate change or a different opinion about the most recent, you know what I'm talking about. They say, you think you're smarter than a scientist? Here's what I do. You can literally Google any scientist to agree with any opinion you want to have. When they do that, when they're like hundreds and thousands of scientists say that this is good, I literally just find 2 or 3 articles and I say, these 3 or 4 scientists say it's not. Are you telling me that you're smarter than a scientist? And another stupid thing, and then I'm not going to be long on this, but is trust the science. Science is ever evolving. Science isn't set in stone. Look at all the medical innovations, all the drugs that have been created. Science changes as you observe more evidence. So the whole notion of trust the science is dumb as shit. But back to the main point of view. Imagine the Wright brothers. They owned a bicycle shop. You were trying to invent a flying airplane? Do you think you know more than someone with a degree? Thomas Edison, who was notoriously a poor student, he suffered with hearing loss most of his life. That's why during school, he didn't really listen. He liked to tinker around with things and explore things instead of reading out of other people's books or listening to lectures. They thought he was mentally, and that's not me saying it. It's in a book that I read. I've read a couple books about Edison, but it talks about how they thought he was not intelligent. He never got a degree, but Edison, he invented the filament, the bamboo filament, and later tungsten for the light bulb. He also invented the motion picture camera. He also invented direct current, which is what you charge your phone in. But you get the point. You can't just say, oh, you're not a scientist, or oh, you're not a doctor. Your opinion doesn't matter. Another approach I use is if you go to a restaurant, you order a steak well done. The waitress brings the steak to you and it's totally raw. How can you criticize the steak? You've never been a cook in a restaurant. How can you criticize someone who's been a cook in a restaurant? They also do that with coaches. Like if you disagree, why didn't that coach go for it on 4th down? Why didn't that coach put that player in? Whatever. Everybody has their own opinions. Where did you coach at? Another example you can use is when someone criticizes a politician, you can ask them, where did you serve in government? If you never served in government before, how can your dumbass criticize people in the government? You see how stupid, asinine, and moronic that is? That means you don't actually look at the data. You don't actually formulate your own opinions. The only time I would say this really works, now is it ethical? If you look at advertising and ethical, there's a fine line, and it's constantly flirting with each other of advertising versus ethical. Selling sugar at McDonald's to kids, is that ethical? Is it persuasion? What is it? But the only time it really works is if you're trying to sell a product. Say that you made a course on U.S. history, for instance, to make it easy. You want to sell that course to a school. You would tell them, instead of explaining everything, you could say something to the extent of, someone from Harvard said that this course is amazing, it's necessary, blah, blah, blah. Or someone who works for a news organization. That's pretty persuasive. But again, is that ethical? Who knows? I'm not here to be the morality police here. I don't tell people what's moral and what's not. But anytime somebody during a debate brings up a snarky remark like, are you a scientist? You should ask them, what about those dumbass Wright brothers who owned a bike shop? Did they know more than someone with a degree? What about that dumbass Thomas Edison? I mean, hell, Nikola Tesla, who invented alternating current, who invented fluorescent lighting, who invented the electric motor. He never had a degree. Does that dumbass know more than an accredited scientist? And I'm not saying you shouldn't look at experts. If you're coughing, you go to the doctor. If your car's messed up, you go to a mechanic. But they have something called proof of concept. Proof of concept means that mechanic has proven, due to his customers, that he knows the process of how to fix the car. And since knowledge is infinite, and hours in the day are not infinite, you got to figure out what you really want to know deeply about. Like for me, personally, I really want to know deeply about history, philosophy, economics, science, things like that. If I got a car problem that I can't figure out reasonably, I know a little bit about cars, I'll take it to a mechanic. But if you really want to know the knowledge, if you really want to know the intricacies, if you really want to know the details about something, you have to look at the data. You have to look at the evidence. You can literally Google any expert to agree with your opinion.